Turkey was a major player in the European slave trade. In this 15th session of the series, Time for the Nations to Reap, we will uncover the reason why they were so heavily involved and look at the history of the hidden Hebrews in Turkey. Let's begin by rereading a section of the article we talked about previously. This comes from Think Africa, and it's listing the top 10 non-African nations involved in the slave trade. Turkey was 10th on the list. Now, when you think about all of the nations we've talked about thus far, they've been European nations. The United States will be the last country we'll focus on in this series. So why is Turkey on the list? Why aren't they lumped in with all of the other Arab nations involved in the Arab slave trade? We'll get to that. And some of the information may surprise you. So let's reread this. It says Turkey was involved in the African slave trade for the longest time of any nation. Let that sink in. The Byzantine and the Sasanian Empire both imported slaves captured from Ethiopia. After the 1st century, African slaves were constantly imported from Africa to parts of Turkey by these empires. Slavery continued in Turkey under the Ottoman Empire, where slaves were captured in wars and organized slave raid expeditions to Africa to capture slaves. 2.5 million slaves were imported just between 1453 and 1700, according to Ottoman customs records. Listen, Bantu men and women were captured as slaves for use on plantations and in domestic households. While Turkey signed a deal to stop the slave trade in 1890, slavery only explicitly ended as late as 1964, when legislation was adopted to end slavery. We have a lot to unpack in this session, family. We are the people who were scattered to the four corners, just like the prophecy said. Now, after all of these years, there is a desire to know who we really are. Let's look at this information from Kantara Day. It says nothing left but the color. The Afro-Turks, whose ancestors came to the Ottoman Empire as slaves in the 19th century, are still struggling for recognition. Now, though, their desire to assimilate into the wider society has become greater than their desire to maintain their own identity. Let's read some of this. Listen to this story from a man named Mustafa Olpak. It says he had been married to a white Turk for 25 years when her family suddenly announced the Arab isn't going to get any of the inheritance. Black people are often called Arabs in Turkish. Olpak divorced his wife. It wasn't the only racist comment or example of discrimination which he'd experienced in his life. Here's another one. This is a woman named Alev Karakatal. She is an Afro-Turk woman who now lives in Istanbul. So she described the strategy with which many Afro-Turks confront discrimination. She says by entering into mixed marriages, Afro-Turks try to have lighter-skinned children so that eventually their color will disappear altogether. She says we have nothing else left aside from the color. There's nothing left culturally anymore. So nothing left but the color. It says when Karakatal, who is herself of mixed descent, asked her parents about her origins, the answer was always, "We are Turks and Muslims." and that roots weren't important. In Olpak's autobiography, he wrote, "The first generation has the experiences. The second generation denies them, and the third generation researches into them." That certainly applies to the Afro-Turks. Karakartal eventually started researching herself and found the reasons for the shame and the silence. Listen to what she says. "Our ancestors didn't come voluntarily to Anatolia. They were sold as slaves, exploited, abused, and excluded. But it's not just the families themselves who remain silent. Olpak points out, nobody speaks about us. Otherwise, if they were to tell our story, they would find themselves in conflict with the official version of history. One would have to speak about slavery." Are we seeing a pattern here? Where the nations involved in enslaving the descendants of the ancient Israelites try to block that information from coming out at the national level. They want the history and their involvement to just go away. Let's keep going. Now listen to this part. It says Elif Sisi, a doctoral student at the Yetepe University, did some research into the marriage patterns and the identity of Afro-Turks in 3 villages near Bayındır. As far as their identity was concerned, she found out that they had virtually no knowledge about their origins and the roots of their families. No knowledge. When asked about their self-definition, the large majority said they defined themselves primarily as Turks. Only a minority saw themselves as Turkish citizens with African roots, and the desire to be fully assimilated in society was more important than the maintenance of their identity. Sisi found that even though Afro-Turks don't admit it, both men and women prefer white marriage partners. Listen, it says, but marriage is not the main problem for them. According to Kartal, 90% of the Afro-Turks are poor. Ringing a bell? With little education. Most of the men have no job, and of course, nor do the women. That doesn't mean that the blacks are less intelligent or talented. It just means that they haven't got a chance. So listen to this article from Atlanta Black Star. It says, after generations of assimilation in Turkey, Afro-Turks are fighting to reclaim their heritage and identity. It says, although this is unknown to many, there are up to 100,000 people of African descent in the nation of Turkey, a legacy of the Ottoman Empire and of the African slave trade. Afro-Turks, as they are called, have lost their language and have a renewed interest in discovering who they are and from whence they came. The article goes on to say, it's a shame we have lost our African language, the language our great-grandparents spoke. Every minority in Turkey has its language, the Kurds, the Zaza, even the Laz, but we have only Turkish, and we don't know anything about our ancestors, an Afro-Turk man named Orhan told the BBC. After years of suffering, you hide what makes you different, he said. That is why our parents and parents' parents did not teach us their language. They did not want to make us different. They wanted us to only be Turkish. Meanwhile, due to years of intermarriage, there are likely many Turkish people who are descended from black people and do not realize it. as the National reported. The National pushed for assimilation and a homogeneous society since the founding of the Republic, and the end of the Ottoman Empire has meant that black identity was discouraged. However, black people in Turkey are beginning to reclaim their heritage and their African past. For example, Mustafa Olpak, a grandson of enslaved Kenyans, pushed Slave Coast, a 2005 memoir chronicling his family's saga from the Horn of Africa to Crete in Turkey. I want to share some information from this journal article entitled An Example of Distortion in Turkish Social Studies and History Textbooks. So this is information regarding slavery. It says the first one of the distortions and omissions in the textbooks is that slavery is reflected as if it were only experienced in Western societies. Secondly, the textbooks present an image that Islam banned slavery, and hence it is implied that slavery did not take place in Turkish history. Now, this is the same thing that the Netherlands, Denmark, and Sweden did. It says another distortion or deficiency is the presentation of slavery as a problem of distant past. Finally, slavery is presented as a situation only black people were subjected. The findings required a two-way discussion. Therefore, firstly, identify issues as discussed within the framework of social identity theory. Finally, suggestions were made on what to do in these and similar situations in the textbooks. It says, according to Tahiroglu, slavery was not of any economic importance in the Ottoman Empire because the economic structure of the empire did not depend on slavery. Now, I don't quite believe that. Why would they continue this practice if they weren't benefiting from it? And to be involved in it longer than any other nation? No, I don't think so. So it says we would like to add a few words about slavery in Islam as well. It says Islam permits slavery. Islam encourages the salvation of slaves, orders slaves to be treated well, but Islam does not prohibit slavery. So it says, according to one view, only war prisoners can be enslaved in Islam. Another view, on the other hand, states that with some restrictions, people who are born from slave mothers can be enslaved too. It should also be noted that the term war prisoners does not apply to only men who fought in enemy ranks. Women and children of the defeated are considered as prisoners of war as well. Thus, they are eligible for enslavement as well. Now, that's interesting. So listen, it says, we believe that the way slavery is handled in Turkish social studies and history textbooks is worthy of investigation because schools owe students a more complete and correct version of past or historic occurrences. When students don't learn an accurate version of history, they lose confidence in what the school teaches, and this loss of confidence makes the students prefer to believe in overt propaganda. It goes on to say another factor that complicates research into the presence of African slaves in the context of Turkey compared with the transatlantic slave trade in the Ottoman Empire was organized according to a framework known as the Millet system, which guaranteed the protection of non-Muslim groups by the Sultan. This system allowed non-Muslim groups to continue practicing their own religious rites without having to convert. Religion was the primary metric of identification within the Ottoman Empire, and subjects were labeled according to religion rather than to origin. In Ottoman archives, Africans also appear according to their religious association rather than their place of origin or race. Such archival documentation is unheard of within African diaspora scholarship of the transatlantic. Continuing on, it says, even though the presence of Africans in the Ottoman Empire is not a particularly constitutive part of the Turkish national historiography, the fact remains that Turks of African descent are embodied vestiges of this history. One key element of this embodiment are the semantic designations that have emerged throughout history to refer to those that are considered, for lack of a better term, as something, quote unquote, African. Such terms as Saya, Zinsi, and Arab. Saya and Zinsi operates as derogatory terms that specifically refer to the black color or the color black, Saya, and black-skinnedness, Zinsi. Arab, on the other hand, means Arab. These three terms are often used interchangeably. The distance in meaning between black as a physical color and Arab as a group classification, which holds no bearing on the histories of these particular bodies, prevents Saya, Zinsi, and Arab from collapsing into a singularly defined racially black category, despite their so-called positions as people of the African diaspora. So why are they referring to those with black skin as Arabs? Arab means Arab. So what's the difference, family? Aren't Turkish people Arabs? No, they are not. Did you know that? So let's shift just a bit and talk about who the Turks really are, because there's no way to really track the number of people from the continent of Africa that they actually enslaved, because they were identifying them based on religion. And we know that a lot of our people were forced to convert to Islam. But in addition, they were labeling them as Arabs. Now, some of you may find this information very interesting. This comes from Medical Express. It says Turkish genetic study shows high degree of variation and admixture. So it says the researchers found that the people of Turkey have close genetic ties to the people in the Caucasus, the Balkans, Europe, and the Middle East. Listen to the findings of the National Library of Medicine. This journal article is entitled "The Genetic Structure of the Turkish Population Reveals High Levels of Variation and Admixture." It says the results show that the genetic structure of present-day Anatolia, meaning Turkey, was shaped by historical and modern-day migrations, high levels of admixture, and inbreeding. We observe that modern-day Turkey has close genetic relationships with the neighboring Balkan and Caucasus populations. This is even in the Paleolithic period. Anatolia, or Asia Minor as it was once called, served as a bridge for migrations between Africa, Asia, and Europe. Long before the establishment of nation-states, intermixing between human populations occurred in Anatolia. Keep listening, because I'm going to get to a very important point as we go on. It says, indeed, Anatolia has become home to many civilizations, including the Hattians, the Hurrians, the Assyrians, the Hittites, the Greeks, the Thracians, the Phrygians, the Eurasians, the Armenians, and Turks. Let's go on. Let's look at this from studylight.org, and it's talking about the Hittites and the Hivites based on the Hallman Bible Dictionary. So it says these are non-Semitic minorities within the population of Canaan who frequently became involved in the affairs of the Israelites. It says Hittite and Hivite peoples, listen, of Indo-European origin, identified within the population of Canaan as sons of Canaan in the table of nations. So it's referring to Genesis 10:15 and Genesis 10:17, seemingly infiltrated from their cultural and political centers in the north and settled throughout Palestine. Although the history and culture of the Hittites is being clarified, a problem exists with the so-called Hivites, a name of unknown origin without any extra biblical references. That they were uncircumcised would suggest an Indo-European rather than Semitic origin. The more acceptable identification, therefore, would be with the biblical Horites or Hurrians, whose history and character are well known from extra biblical sources and consistent with role attributed to them in the biblical text. And guess who married a Canaanite, Hittite, and Hivite? Esau. Listen to this information from Encyclopedic Dictionary of Bible and Theology. It says Horites, they are cavemen, a race of troglodytes who dwelt in the limestone caves which abounded in Edom. Their ancestor was Seir, who probably gave his name to the district where he lived. They were a branch of the Hivites. They were dispossessed by the descendants of Esau, and as a people gradually became extinct. So are we really talking about Neanderthals here? Let's look at this from Genesis 36, 1 through 8. It says, now this is the genealogy of Esau, who is Edom. Esau took his wives from the daughters of Canaan. Adah, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. Aholibamah, the daughter of Anah, the daughter of Zibeon the Hivite. And Basemath, Ishmael's daughter, sister of Nebajoth. It says, now Adah bore Eliphaz to Esau, and Basemath bore Reuel, and Aholibamah bore Jeush, Jalem, and Korah. These were the sons of Esau who were born to him in the land of Canaan. And as we read the account given to us in Genesis, we know that the people who were living in Canaan were exceedingly wicked. But Esau was a man given to passion. He was not wise. As a result of marrying these women, he was entering into covenant agreement with these nations. So we see here in verse 6, it says, then Esau took his wives, his sons, his daughters, and all the persons of his household, his cattle and all his animals and all his goods which he had gained, where? In the land of Canaan, and went to a country away from the presence of his brother Jacob, for their possessions were too great for them to dwell together, and the land where they were strangers could not support them because of their livestock. So Esau dwelt in Mount Seir, and it repeats, Esau is Edom. Let's go on, because we're going to see in verses 12 through 22 that his son Eliphaz is going to follow in his footsteps. It says, now Timnah was the concubine of Eliphaz, Esau's son. Keep her name in mind, Timnah. And she bore Amalek to Eliphaz. Now, if you've been reading scripture for any length of time, you know that they were the enemies of Israel. They tried many times to wipe them out. So it goes on to say, these are the sons of Adah, Esau's wife. These were the sons of Ruel, and it names these sons. Then these were the sons of Basemath, Esau's wife. These were the sons of Aholibamah, Esau's wife, the daughter of Anah, the daughter of Zibeon, and she bore to Esau Jeush, and it names the rest of their sons. Then verse 15. Listen, it says, these were the chiefs of the sons of Esau, the sons of Eliphaz, the firstborn son of Esau, were chief Timon, chief Omar, chief Zepho, chief Kenaz, chief Korah, chief Gatam, and chief Amalek. These were the chiefs of Eliphaz in the land of Edom. So as you continue reading, you'll see that his lineage is this intermixture with the Canaanites, the Hivites, and the Hittites. But listen, when we get down to verse 19, these were the sons of Esau, who is Edom, and these were their chiefs. These were the sons of Seir, the Horite, who inhabited the land. Listen, the sons of Seir, the Horite. His sons were Lotan, Shobal, Zibeon, Anah, Dijon, Ezer, and Dishan. These were the chiefs of the Horites, the sons of Seir in the land of Edom. Listen to this. And the sons of Lotan were Hori and Heman, but Lotan's sister was Timnah. Go back up to verse 12. Timnah was the concubine of Eliphaz, Esau's son. She bore Amalek to Eliphaz. Who was her brother? Lotan. Lotan. Who was he? He was a Horite. He was a Horite. So again, Eliphaz would later follow in his father Esau's footsteps. So Esau was now mixed with the Canaanites, the Hittites, and the Horite bloodlines. So isn't it interesting that these people called Indo-Europeans were in the Caucasus Mountains, a people described as warlike, just like Esau, who would later leave the mountains and become colonizers, just like Esau. He went to Mount Seir and basically colonized them. Let's keep going. Now, this may be of interest to some. This is from the Diplomat. It says, the epic story of how the Turks migrated from Central Asia to Turkey. Lovers of antiquity and the classical world know very well that Asia Minor, modern Turkey, was formerly inhabited by a variety of non-Turkic peoples. Most of these people spoke Indo-European languages and included the Hittites, the Phrygians, and the Luwians. It says, after the conquest of Alexander the Great, Asia Minor was mostly Hellenized and remained solidly Greek until the 11th century, with Armenians forming the majority in the eastern parts of the region, as they had since antiquity. In the second half of the first millennium, Turkic peoples were gradually streaming into most of Central Asia from their original homeland in the Altai Mountains of Western Mongolia. It says they gradually displaced or assimilated both the settled and nomadic Iranian-speaking people. But how did they get all the way to Turkey, which has the largest concentration of Turkic peoples today? This says in the 11th century, Turks began appearing at the edges of Asia Minor, which is Anatolia, which was then controlled by the Greeks. Many of the Turks were mercenaries in the employ of local Arab and Persian rulers to the east of the Byzantine Empire and Armenia, the dominant states in Asia Minor. So by looking at the red arrow, you can see where they were. The Altai Mountains is in between Russia and Kazakhstan. Now that's interesting. So it says, in 1037, the Seljuk Empire, a Turkic state, was founded northeast of Iran in Central Asia and quickly overran much of Persia, Iraq, and the Levant. By the 1060s, the Seljuk Empire bordered Byzantine Asia Minor. It should be noted that the Turks were a minority, ruling a Persian, Arab, and Kurdish majority. Isn't it the same behavior as the other colonizing nations we've been talking about in this series? Now you see why. They come from the same stock. They are descended from the Indo-Europeans, and this is why they don't refer to themselves as Arabs. Pause and think on that. They call the people they enslaved Arab, meaning black, but they don't consider themselves to be Arabs. Let's go on. And here's something else that may be surprising to some. They are a member of NATO. Now think about the nations that belong to NATO. Let's read this information from The Hill. It's entitled, Expelling Turkey from NATO Would Create a Dangerous Foe. Let's find out why. It says, after the United States, Turkey has the second largest standing armed forces in NATO, with more soldiers, 639,000 military, paramilitary, and civilian personnel, tanks, 3,200, armored fighting vehicles, 9,500, artillery, 2,400, and military aircraft, 1,067 fighter jets, attack helicopters, and transports, than Germany, France, or the United Kingdom. Turkey's navy comprises 194 ships, mostly frigates, corvettes, and coastal gunships, but including 12 submarines. Some analysts evaluate Turkey as among the most militarily powerful nations, ranking 9th among 137 military powers worldwide. So the question is asked, do we really want to kick Turkey out of NATO and have its military power and strategic geography aligned with Russia? Listen to what it says. Geographically, Turkey occupies some of the most strategically important territory in the world. In the world? Now listen to this. It is the only NATO member state in the Middle East, bordering Syria and Iraq, near Lebanon and Israel, a region that has been and continues to be the crucial crossroads of empire and history since biblical times. And now you know why they are the only NATO member state in the Middle East. It says Turkey controls the Bosphorus Straits, Marmara Sea, and Dardanelles Straits between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, giving it the capability to contain Russia's powerful Black Sea fleet. Turkey's geographic location and strong military makes it the anchor of NATO's southern flank against Russian aggression. Turkey also is an unsinkable aircraft carrier with 98 airports capable of supporting NATO air operations over the Middle East, Black Sea, and the Balkans. Listen, it is one of only 5 NATO states the others being Germany, Italy, Belgium, and the Netherlands, storing U.S. tactical nuclear weapons on its territory. Now, you know they're not going to just trust their nuclear weapons to just anybody. But hopefully now you see the connection. It says some 50 B-61 nuclear bombs are bunkered at Incirlik Air Force Base, controlled by U.S. personnel stationed there. So which nations belong to NATO? Well, as you can see, there are no African or Arab nations in NATO. The fact that Turkey is a member tells you who they are. Now here's another connection that you will find interesting. This comes from history.org regarding Constantinople. It says Constantinople is an ancient city in modern-day Turkey that's now known as Istanbul. First settled in the 7th century BC, Constantinople developed into a thriving port thanks to its prime geographic location between Europe and Asia and its natural harbor. In AD 330, it became the site of Roman Emperor Constantine's New Rome, a Christian city of immense wealth and magnificent architecture. Constantinople stood as the seat of the Byzantine Empire for the next 1100 years, enduring periods of great fortune and horrific sieges, until being overrun by Mehmed II of the Ottoman Empire in 1453. Listen, it says in AD 330, Constantine established the city that would make its mark in the ancient world as Constantinople, but also would become known by other names. So it says this city would be governed by Roman law, observe Christianity, and adopt Greek as its primary language, although it would serve as a melting pot of races and cultures due to its unique geographic location straddling Europe and Asia. Continuing, it says, while Constantine's founding of New Rome coincided with efforts to establish Christianity as the state religion, that didn't formally happen until after Theodosius I ascended to power in 379. He convened the First Council of Constantinople in 381, which supported the Council of Nicaea of 325, and declared the city patriarch as second in power only to Rome's. Constantinople became a center of the iconoclast controversy after Leo III in 730 outlawed the worshipping of religious icons. Although the Seventh Ecumenical Council of 787 reversed that decision, iconoclasm resumed as a rule of law less than 30 years later and lasted until 843. With the Great Schism of 1054, when the Christian church split into Roman and Eastern divisions, Constantinople became the seat of the Eastern Orthodox Church. Listen, remaining so even after the Muslim Ottoman Empire took control of the city in the 15th century. Now, isn't that interesting that it remained the seat of the Eastern Orthodox or the Catholic Church even after the Muslim Ottoman Empire took control? Why? Same people. Ancient Pergamon. And what's an ancient Pergamon? The seat of Satan, also known as the Pergamon altar. Let's read this from Biblical Archaeology Society. It says, perched atop a windswept mountain along the Turkish coastline and gazing proudly, almost defiantly, over the azure Asian Sea, sit the ruins of ancient Pergamon. Although the majority of its superb intact monuments now sit in Berlin's Pergamon Museum, enough remains of the Acropolis for the visitor to sense the former greatness of the city that once rivaled Alexandria, Ephesus, and Antioch in culture and commerce. And listen to this, and whose scientific advancements in the field of medicine resonate through the corridors of today's medical treatment facilities. Pause and think on that. It says, juxtaposed sharply against this image of enlightened learning is that of Satan's throne, as described by the prophet John of Patmos, referenced in Revelation 2:12-13, which some scholars interpret as referring to the great altar of Pergamon, one of the most magnificent surviving structures from the Greco-Roman world. Why would the seat of Satan be in Turkey, you all? And by the way, the altar was dedicated to Zeus. You can see some of the images that decorated the base. It has a relief showing the battle between the giants of the Olympian gods. Now, isn't that interesting? So let's do an overview. The Hittites in ancient Anatolia. It says the Hittites were an ancient Anatolian modern-day Turkey people who formed an empire between 1600 to 1180 BCE. The Hittites manufactured advanced iron goods, ruled over their kingdom through government officials with independent authority over various branches of government, and worshipped storm gods. The Hittites' ongoing conflicts with Egypt produced the world's first known peace treaty. The Hittites were an ancient group of Indo-Europeans who moved into Asia Minor and formed an empire at Hattusa in Anatolia around 1600 BCE. The Hittite Empire reached great heights during the mid-1300s BCE when it spread across Asia Minor into the northern Levant and upper Mesopotamia. So it says, like many Indo-Europeans, the Hittites were able to travel long distances and migrate to other lands due to the domestication of horses. The spread of technologies like the wheel and wagon, which were also used in ancient Mesopotamia and other early civilizations in the region, also assisted pastoralist and agrarian civilizations. And there you have it. We've covered 9 of the 10 nations on the list involved in the European slave trade. Are you understanding now why Turkey is on that list? Turkey is the bridge that connects Europe and Asia. So for those who cannot understand why these people hate us so much, listen to these words from Genesis 27:41. So Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, the days of mourning for my father are at hand. Then I will kill my brother Jacob. This is telling us why. It's because of the blessing. It has nothing to do with skin color, religion, or abilities. It's because Jacob received what Esau wanted most. But Yah in his infinite wisdom knew what was in his heart, and he knew what was going to happen to Esau's seed. But he has certainly gotten his revenge. He's been working through all of the nations involved in our captivity. But let me show you something. This story can be found in 2 Chronicles 20. At that time, there were nations coming against Judah. But their king, King Jehoshaphat, turned his attention to seek the Most High, and the king proclaimed a fast, a period of fasting throughout Judah. Then he stood in the assembly of the Most High and he prayed. And after he prayed, the Spirit of the Most High came upon one of the prophets. And this is what he said. Then in the midst of the assembly, the Spirit of the Most High came upon Jahaziel, the son of Zechariah, the son of Benaiah, the son of Jeiel, the son of Mattaniah, the Levite of the sons of Asaph. And he said, Listen, all of you, Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and King Jehoshaphat. This is what the Most High says to you. Do not fear or be dismayed because of this great multitude, for the battle is not yours, but Yah's. So he told them, Tomorrow go down against them. Behold, they will come up by the ascent of Ziz, and you will find them at the end of the valley in front of the wilderness of Jeruel. You will not need fight in this battle. You don't have to fight. He says, just take your position, stand and watch the salvation of the Most High in your behalf. Judah and Jerusalem, do not fear or be dismayed. Tomorrow go out to face them, for the Most High is with you. So Jehoshaphat bowed his head with his face to the ground, and all Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem fell down before the Most High, worshiping the Most High. The Levites from the sons of the Kohathites and from the sons of the Korathites stood up to praise the Most High of Israel with a very loud voice. It says, They rose early in the morning and went out to the wilderness of Tekoa. And when they went out, Jehoshaphat stood and said, Listen to me, Judah and inhabitants of Jerusalem, put your trust in the Most High. Put your trust in Yah, and you will endure. Put your trust in his prophets and succeed. When he had consulted with the people, he appointed those who sang to the Most High and those who praised him in holy attire, as they went out before the army and said, Give thanks to the Most High, for his faithfulness is everlasting. When they began singing and praising, the Most High set ambushes against the sons of Ammon, Moab, and Mount Seir, who had come out against Judah. So they were struck down. Now that is one way to get your enemies shaking in their boots. When they see that your trust is in the Almighty and you refuse to walk in fear. Trust that the Most High will move mightily on our behalf, just like he said he would, just like he promised. It says, For the sons of Ammon and Moab rose up against the inhabitants of Mount Seir. Do you see what's happening here? The sons of Ammon and Moab rose up against the inhabitants of Mount Seir, completely destroying them. He caused the enemies who were coming against our ancestors to start fighting each other. They were completely destroying them. And when they had finished with the inhabitants of Seir, they helped to destroy one another. When Judah came to the watchtower of the wilderness, they turned toward the multitude, and behold, there were corpses lying on the ground, and there was no survivor. When Jehoshaphat and his people came to take their spoils, they found much among them, including goods, garments, and valuable things which they took for themselves, more than they could carry. And they were taking the spoils for 3 days because there was so much. So yes, we see what's happening around the world. We see the storm clouds rising, but the Most High wants His people to trust Him in this hour. This battle is not ours. It belongs to Him. We have promises that He will deliver us. He will restore and redeem and place us back in our land. Has He not said it? And we know that His word will not return unto Him void. Only with our eyes will we see what's coming upon our enemies. So we will continue with this on the live this coming Wednesday. Be sure to join me for that. If this message has been a blessing, be sure to hit the like, share it, family. And if you have not subscribed, you're welcome to do so. Join me next time. Be blessed, family.